Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Naveen Agarwal. This video is a recording of an interactive Q&A session we just had very recently on the topic of risk management for medical devices. Now, risk management continues to be a challenging topic, even for those of us who have been in the industry for many years. So the intent behind these interactive Q&As is to engage in a conversation, in a dialogue. And sure enough, we had a very engaging conversation about certain topics related to risk management. And this is not going to be the only Q&A session. We will have more in the future. So you can watch the entire video at leisure. It's about an hour long. Or you can follow the time-stamped links as part of this video to scroll forward to a question of interest. So I want to invite you to take a look at it. And I hope you will enjoy and learn something new. If there are more questions, please let me know. And I look forward to meeting you again on our future interactive Q&As. But what I would like to do is I want to start with a submitted question. And that, again, to let you know, when you register, you can submit your question in advance. And usually I do some work prior and open the meeting with a submitted question. And then we go into more questions. So let me start with that. I thought it was a pretty good question that came up. So let me see if you guys can see my screen. So are you all able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah. Perfect. Great. So first I wanted to share with you this. I did a simple kind of keyword search, in EU-MDR. So this is our focus this month. If you look for safety, nearly 300 times, risk or risks, nearly 250 times, clinical evaluation, 145, post-market, 81, risk management, 37, benefit risk, 28. Maybe exact numbers are not that important, but the idea here is it is significant. The significant amount of attention has been given to risk management. And that's why it is important for us to continue learning this. So I think this question is pretty important because there are requirements. And based on some work that I did after this question came in, there is a significant gap between what ISO 14971 says and what EU-MDR is requiring. So I'm hoping that this will also lead to another question that Niamh, you asked, and if you could hold on to that a little bit, we could discuss that. So Article 32H, summary of safety and clinical performance for implantable devices. That's one place I discovered. Information on any residual risk and any undesirable effects, warning and precautions. This should be disclosed. Any. Note the keyword any. Okay. Annex 1, Chapter 1, Item 4. These are the general safety requirements. Manage risks so that residual risk associated with each hazard as well as the overall residual risk is just acceptable. And the content in parentheses is my emphasis. And they talk about as far as possible without adversely affecting benefit risk. So all residual risks and overall residual risk, and inform users of any residual risk. Again, I highlighted the word any. So they're not saying you choose. Requirements regarding the information supplied with the device, label and IFU. So residual risks which are required to be communicated. Now, which are required? So you ask the question, which one is required? Any means all or some? We don't know. So there is some room for discussion here and confusion. Residual risks which are required to be communicated to be included as limitations, contraindications, precautions, or warnings. Annex 14, clinical evaluation. So what they're asking is to have a process in place, a definition, a specification, and methods used for safety with reference to the determination of residual risks. So that's as far as, and there are some areas where they also talk about more residual risk, but I thought this was most important. Now let me go through what ISO 14971 is saying very briefly. Residual risk disclosure. Clause 8. So they have taken this requirement out of the individual residual risk section and put it in the overall residual risk. If the overall residual risk is just acceptable, the manufacturer shall inform users of significant, now underline is mine, significant residual risks, not any residual risks, significant, and shall include the necessary information. So that is okay. So then what does that mean? So let's look into Annex A 2.8. However, it is manufacturer's decision as to what and how much information should be provided. So ISO 14971 is asking the manufacturer to make that judgment regarding significant residual risks. So I go further. Look at TR 24971. They are recommending that decisions of the manufacturer regarding the disclosure of residual risks are recorded in the RMS. So you must document why you decided, what you decided. And finally, two things. I think it is useful to understand the intent of the disclosure in the context of why are they asking us to disclose this? This is in TR 24971. Within the framework of the intended use, the user can decide in which clinical setting the device can be used to achieve a certain benefit for the patient. So we are helping them make patient-specific decision in a clinical setting by disclosure of these residual risks. Let's understand the context and the intent. Further, it can also be useful for the user or the hospital organization to prepare the patient for possible side effects or harms that can occur during or after the use of the device. That's another purpose. We need to know the residual risks to be able to inform and prepare the patient. This is important. Annex CC.4, we need to consider practicability and in the context of benefit risk. And what they are saying is that communicating too many residual risks so that the user has difficulty understanding which ones are really important. Makes sense, right? You cannot fly a plane that has a very complex dashboard. So you need to prioritize, simplify, and help decision. So I would say I'm going to stop the sharing now and really open for discussion. Because, yeah, there is some room for confusion in the regulatory requirement, what the standard is saying. But I, as a practitioner, mostly focus on the intent and helping patient safety, making the right decisions, which is what I read in the annexes and TR 24971. So I'm going to pause here and see if you guys have any questions, comments, and see what we want to talk about.
I can say something. No, Ed, you go ahead. I was going to say Ed probably has a lot of insights about this since he's one of the authors.
Yes, yes.
Well, thanks, Bijan. The one comment that I would make is what we're trying to do is to provide the healthcare professional the information they need in order to make sure that the device and its use is appropriate for the particular patient. So we want to give them all the information that we can so they can make that decision. Is this the right device and its use for this particular patient in this environment? And one of the things that we encountered today is that we're making medical devices for a whole lot of markets with a whole lot of different standards of care. So, we have to look at it from the perspective, okay, here's what we expect to be done. And then is that appropriate for the patient? Well, the healthcare provider knows the standard of care and how they're going to use the device. So it's appropriate for them to guide the patient on making a decision.
Yeah, so I think we are talking about, at the end of the day, from a patient perspective, making the right decision, taking benefit, risk, and safety into consideration, right? That's the intent. Regulation is saying any residual risk, 14971 saying significant residual risks, right? So I'm thinking people will be very confused by this. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I think the other point is to note, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but at the end of the day, the regulation is a law, right? The MDR, medical device regulation, I think it's important. It's a little bit different from the directives. This is now a law, right? So I think the law or the MDR is going to trump what's in the standards. So are we going to get back into a more contentious situation now again where we have, obviously, content deviations? We knew how challenging they were in the past. And I suppose, I think there was still confusion, to be honest, when the 2019 version of the standard came out and the MDR. There was a lot of blogs there saying that all the content deviations were gone away, but I actually don't think that's the case when you actually read it in detail and study it in detail, like what we're doing here. Do you know what I mean? But I think it's, I think the key thing here as well to understand is that the regulation is the law. And I suppose device manufacturers would use standards as a mechanism to help them meet the general safety and performance requirements. But in the cases where they don't align one-to-one, I think that's going to be a challenge, right?
Yep, for sure. For sure. So anybody else has any thoughts to share on this?
Yeah, so typically, like another way to understand here is that how to disclose the risk also, like whether are typical drugs related disclosures, like we generally see the ads from the drugs, and they in a quick time they specify many different kind of diseases can be possible. So these are basically the risk disclosure. But how to do it for the medical devices? Do we generally specify the harms that yes, usage of this device can lead to this harm, but ultimately in most of the medical devices, I see whether it is a lower classification or higher classification, ultimately in all the risk files, one of the possible harm lead to death. Yeah, because people generally are very conservative, and most of the risk management teams, they tend to at least go to the highest severity as well. So then you will always, in most of the devices, if you are disclosing this, you will always see that, yes, this usage of this device can lead to death, but is it really practical, or is it really good to specify that? So I think that is another thought process we can talk about here. Yeah. But, and of course, the question is still not answered for us between the gap, but we can connect with this topic that, yes, I mean, if specified, do we really specify like this also?
I think we want to make it useful, but to Niam's points, we also want to comply with the law, right?
Yeah.
And this is a central question for our industry: how much we do for compliance and how much we do for patient safety. And in our world, in our professional life, we are constantly torn apart, right? That's a challenge we face. Anybody else wants to share something?
Yes, I want to jump in there, Naveen. You know me. Life leads to death. Okay, so we could ultimately put down every risk results in death. That is not the intent of the standard. The intent is those things that are immediately an outcome of the standard. Now, the other side of the coin is that any particular hazardous situation could lead to multiple harms. And you need to explore all of those direct multiple harms. And I use an example. At one point, I worked in hospital beds, and the side rail would break off to a faulty weld, and the patient would fall out of bed when they were leaning on the side rail and it broke. And they could end up with nothing. They could end up with a contusion. They could end up with a broken bone, and they could die when they fell on their head. Now, it's your responsibility to identify the probability of occurrence and the severity for every one of those harms and document that in your risk analysis. And then some of those may be acceptable and some of them may not. So then that takes you to, well, I need to put a risk control measure in or not to reduce that risk. So it's a very complex situation, and the MDR situation is kind of complex as well. We don't know how that's going to end up, but the direction of CEN and CENELEC right now is to not have any content deviations. That is kind of because there were so many errors in those content deviations, and they were more trouble than they were worth. So that's the direction that CEN and CENELEC is attempting to go.
Yep, and that's the next topic I wanted to get into, but I want to hold on to this topic a little bit more, if you guys, because there are several pieces here which we need to understand. Like standard says, not every individual risk residual risk would need to be in the green zone or acceptable zone, right? You could have benefit risk for individual residual risks. You could have benefit risks for overall residual risk. When I read the EU-MDR, it says all residual risks should be judged acceptable. And they are actually mandating as far as possible as the risk acceptability criteria. That's how I read it. So what about the other ones? LRA or as low as reasonably practicable. We are going into the same debate that we had in 2012 with the harmonization, and that created a lot of confusion in the field. I've seen so many risk documents where you do acceptability one way here, another way here, and everyone is confused. So that is another thing that I noticed about this. So this residual risk was, in my mind, a question related to many different kind of considerations that we have to be thinking about. Does that make sense? Anybody else has any thoughts on this specific topic? Go ahead, Bijan.
Yeah, I have a potential solution for this. I think ISO 14971 has the right approach. It is what's beneficial. On the other hand, as Niam said, it is the law that you have to disclose everything. So I think we can do both. My suggestion is to prioritize all your risks in the order of their magnitude and disclose the ones that you think are beneficial, which would be the highest risks typically. And then say these are the most important risks, and then add everything else that you want separately, maybe in a separate page or something, so that you have fulfilled the requirements of the law and also given the benefit of knowledge to your customers.
Mm-hmm. And again, to your point, one point to emphasize would be is you need to decide in your own organizations what criteria you're going to use and be very clear about that. And that goes to risk acceptability in the first place. So I think that's a good point. When we are evaluating criteria for risk acceptability, we should also talk about how we're going to prioritize or make a list of what we call significant residual risks. Right. Are we going to use severity? Are we going to use the overall level? What are we going to do? Right. How is it in the context of the use of the device, benefit use, intended use? Mm-hmm. What is our criteria? Make it upfront in the risk management plan. Exactly. Would be a good idea. And then I think, Surendra, you were saying, like in the advertisements, they go very fast towards the end with a scrolling screen. No one can read, no one can understand. Put everything there for everything else, which is not going to be useful in decision making, right? So but the problem is we'll have to learn how to do that. Like standard doesn't tell you how to do it. Somebody reads the standard, somebody reads EU-MDR, they are going to be actually quite confused how to do it. So we'll have to learn how to do it. And I think as you go back to your organizations, you start talking to people, it's a decision-making process. Get involved in that. Get involved early. So you are creating policy. You are helping decide a course of action that will be useful to you from the organizational point of view, to the patients and doctors, and to the regulators. We have to manage all of it.
Yeah, let's just go back. Can I go back to Ed for a minute? Ed, the point that you made there about SEN and SENELEC planning not to have any content deviations. How can that be the case, given that we're seeing, like, MDR is obviously in force and it is what it is, and the 2019 version of 14971 is there, and we know that there's these issues still that aren't 100% aligned. So how can there not be plans to have any content deviations?
Well, that's the approach that is being taken. I'm not on the committee at SEN and SENELEC. That's have to be European members. And since I'm in the US, I'm excluded from that. But I've been a party to reports out of that committee. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. So,
okay, fair enough. Yeah,
let's wrap this up.
Just curious on that one.
So,
can I make one comment here? Is that neither the standard nor the MDR spells out how we should present those residual risks. So I'm thinking the same as a former speaker, that you can prioritize the ones you find significant and of value to most of your users, and to put them in the most used IFU or whatever accompanying information that you think that your users will actually read. And you can provide all these residual risks in an extra information channel for the individual events where a doctor or other user would need very specific information for odd cases, but still very, very important for that decision making.
Excellent.
You're absolutely right. One of the things, and I was trying to find it, but I can't right now in the documentation, is that you use warnings, cautions, and contraindications as the tools to present that information. So, and the warnings are more serious than the cautions. The contraindications mean you shouldn't use it at all for that type, for the conditions that are specified there. So there's methodology. There's a discussion about somewhere in 24971 about information for safety. So there's approaches to do that, and it's important that we make sure that the people get that information. Now in the drug world, the FDA forces device or drug manufacturers to use what they call black box warnings. So there's this big black box in the information that highlights the really serious side effects of the drug. So there's different ways of doing things depending on the product. And of course, the regulators always step in. And let's see, in Annex 1, Chapter 3 of the MDR is where they talk about information for safety and disclosures there. So you can look at that section of the MDR and find information there on how to do that. It's also interesting that in the harmonized 2012-14971, the Europeans said you could not use information for safety. In the MDR, it says, here's how you use information for safety. So it's directly contradictory to what was in the harmonized 14971. So
lot to come, right? I see a couple of questions. Ronak, you have a question. Besides the colloquial understanding of the terms warnings and precautions, is there a formal definition of these terms in MDR or ISO? Anybody knows? I believe in the first part of MDR, there's a long list of definitions, but I don't remember exactly if these specific terms are defined.
They're not anywhere that I'm aware of, Naveen, although I think maybe like in a IEC standard or some place, I seem to have run across something, but it's been a long time since I saw it.
Well, I'll take that as a follow-up question, and if I come across any resource, I'll pass that on to the team.
Another approach I would like to discuss is like MDR, I believe, is not differentiating between individual residual risk and overall residual risk. It just says that you have to disclose the any residual risk. And on the other hand, our 14971 is clearly differentiated between individual residual risk and then overall residual risk. So to meet MDR compliance, we might think about to get a statement on the overall residual risk, and that statement can be basically used for the disclosure. So I think that is one approach we can think about. I mean, it's just a high level idea, but it's just a thought that that might be one of the possibility we can think about, since MDR does not differentiate as far as I know. But yeah, we can discuss more on this.
Yeah, I think this will be great to come up with new approaches and new ideas and see what works, because we are trying to do right by the regulations. We are also trying to do right by the patient, and we are also trying to do right by our own organization and teams, right? We have to keep all of that in mind.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know the time is running fast, and there was a question that Niamh, you asked, and which I think it relates to this discussion. So I would invite you to have this question so we can talk about it in terms of harmonization. So go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, well, okay. Dr. Naveen, can you address one question which I have typed in the chat?
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Gayatri. You are talking about the scores for probability and occurrence of harms?
Yes.
Okay. So what I will suggest for you is, this is kind of very nicely described in 24.971. We also have a lot of other resources. I will definitely be able to guide you towards answers in this area.
Okay.
And you will be pretty satisfied with those resources. So I would say, in the interest of time, I would like us to focus on this harmonization topic, which is extremely timely, and in the context of what we just discussed, very relevant. So
no
go
problem.
ahead.
So, okay. So would you be writing to me?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Okay, who had the harmonization question?
Go ahead, Niamh. You wanna talk about it? Or you just want me to paraphrase what you were asking?
You go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Understood. So really, there's a lot of interest right now. What's going on from the point of view of harmonization for EU-MDR, right? When, how, what we can expect. So if anything that we can learn from within this group in terms of the kind of questions we have, or the approaches that we are aware of, or the timeline we are aware of, would be of use. I'm sure we are not going to be able to understand everything or learn everything in just a 5-minute discussion. But if we can prepare the ground for beginning to build this understanding over time, discuss these questions and whatever information we have. So I think that's the context of that question, because yes, 14.971 has been recognized both by FDA and in the EU as a standard, but there's no harmonization. So we don't know exactly what to do in terms of complying with the regulation. There are no Z Annexes. And in the light of the discussion we just had on residual risk disclosure in the standard versus the EU-MDR, this topic becomes extremely relevant. So does that is this kind of in the line for what you were thinking, Niamh, or did I miss something?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just a kind of a general discussion on that.
General discussion, yep.
Yeah, and I think, maybe even to kind of go back a step as well, there was a standardization request that went in, I think, was it last June or something? Ed, you probably know more about that than I do. But
I know way too much about that.
Yeah, but I know it was.
That's why we are talking about it, Ed. That's the reason.
Yeah, and it was rejected at the time, and I suppose even just to understand, the reason why. I suppose ISO 14971 was published the same time the ISO. It was published without the Z Annexes, right? But was the whole idea originally that the common specs were supposed to take over, and there was supposed to be a common spec for risk management? I'm just kind of curious what the...
Okay, you want me to tell the whole story?
Yeah, sorry.
Whole truth and nothing but the truth.
If you had access to the final draft international standard, which was published in May of 2019, you would find that there were 5 Z Annexes published in the final draft. And those were proposed to meet the standardization. But at the time, the EU did not have a standardization process for the MDR. So the thing was rejected. Those Z Annexes were taken out, and there was actually a revote that took place without the Z Annexes with what appeared now in December of 2019 as the EN standard. So and EN does not mean harmonized.
Yeah,
okay,
understood.
EN means it's a European standard.
Yeah.
So there's also something called a Vienna Agreement, which says that if there's a ISO standard that has been proposed and that Europe would like to adopt it, then they vote in parallel on the standard. So there has to be a voting process that comes out, and they release simultaneously the European and the ISO version. Now, the ISO version is for the whole world, okay? And the EU is just a tiny part of the world from an ISO perspective. So we've got Japan, Brazil, Australia, New Zealand, and now the UK, the US, Canada, all these other regulatory schemes that have different requirements than the MDR. So the ISO is a standardized version that is created, and then the CEN and CENELEC, which are the two standards bodies in Europe. CEN is equivalent to ISO, CENELEC is equivalent to IEC. Those standards bodies take it upon themselves to create a harmonized version, along with some people called harmonization consultants who work for the EU. And I guess I want to do this nicely. The first round, CEN and CENELEC immediately rejected that first standardization request that came from the EU because it was not set up properly. It didn't meet the requirements of standardization. So boom, they threw that one away. There was a second one that was put out there. It was rejected. There's a third one that was developed and drafted and actually was open for comments. The information I received is that and it's open in the EU to the national bodies and the national standards bodies and so on in the EU vote on it. And they sent all these comments back, and the I guess it's the Commission. I don't fully understand the structure in Europe, but they rejected all of the comments that came in that they requested come in. They just said, no, we're not going to do that. In the meantime, behind the scenes, these harmonization consultants have been working with the CEN and CENELEC committees since that point in time. I think since that, or maybe even before that, June of or May of 2019, when we developed the Z Annexes, which were developed in concert with these harmonization consultants. So behind the scenes, they've been working with this CEN and CENELEC committees, and they came up with a report, and the report was rejected by CEN and CENELEC, and it was sent back to the Commission. The Commission overrode their own harmonization consultants and said that wasn't right. So then they went again and had a more the way it was worded, I think, was a full review. And then at that point, they rejected the complete standard and said it would have to be completely rewritten. Well, the CEN and CENELEC committees are going back to the Commission and saying, hey, this is crazy. This is totally unacceptable. So there's an impasse right now on 14971. Now, I have heard, and it was through the grapevine, so I can't attest to the accuracy, but there have been some other standards that have been have had better reports from the harmonization consultants. Are in a better position to harmonize. But as far as 14971, it's a complete mess right now, and we don't know what's going to happen. So what do you do in the meantime? Here's what you do. This is the way you have to proceed is, first of all, find out if your notified body has a position on this. One other important point. Sen and Senelec withdrew the 2012 standard. It has been withdrawn and replaced by the 2019. So that's an important point. Also, the 2012 was only harmonized to the directives and not the regulations. It cannot be used to meet the requirements of the regulations. So 2012 only has a position with the devices that were already CE marked under the directive. And that will go until 2025, when all of the certifications under the directives are withdrawn. So you got that situation, you've got the unknowns. So what you have to do, as I said, go to your notified body, find out if they have a position. Now I know BSI stated publicly in their compliance navigator that the 2019 standard is the state-of-the-art medical device risk management standard. That means it trumps 2012, okay? Because you always have to go with state-of-the-art. There's a lot of discussion about state-of-the-art in the regulation. So then what do I do? Okay, I have to go clause by clause through the MDR or the IBDR as appropriate, and identify where my risk management system does not meet those requirements, and then make adjustments to meet those requirements. You're going to create a gap analysis, and then maybe a plan for how you're going to revise for the product that you want. It's a huge undertaking, but at this point in time, it's your only option. Now, your notified body might have a position that is a little easier to swallow than that, but that's really in general the way you have to go.
Wow. So thank you, Ed. Thanks for sharing that insight. It is very, very useful.
Oh, one more thing, Naveen.
Go ahead.
On Wednesday, Amy News published an article on harmonization that came out. I was trying to come up with it so I can include it here. But if you go to aami.org and look for Amy News, the Wednesday edition had a very nice article on harmonization. It was written by the Amy secretary, which Amy has a secretariat at the international level for 14971. So Joe Llewellyn is responsible for 14971 and 13485. And Joe was interviewed in that article that has largely the information I was just talking about in there. So it might be useful to read.
And point out, I think you shared that link in the risk management group on LinkedIn.
I did. On the medical device risk management group and the EN risk management group, I shared that link to that article. It's available there if you happen to be in that LinkedIn group. That's available there.
Okay, so great. I know a lot of uncertainty, right? A lot of questions. And this is one topic which I'm thinking we'll probably discuss more as time evolves and we learn more.